Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to this webinar this morning where we're going to be covering off Azure Virtual Desktop and why it really is the ultimate RDS solution. We're going to be covering off a number of different things. So there are a number of different drivers why people might adopt Azure Virtual Desktop. There's a particularly interesting one that's compelling at the moment, which I'm going to be covering off, but there are multiple compelling reasons. One of those is the VMware Horizon and what's going on in the whole Broadcom acquisition and what that means for customers of VMware. I'll explore virtual desktops, its benefits and how you can start adopting it and things that you should consider. So without further ado, I shall get into it. So my name is Leon Godwin. I am the Principal Cloud Evangelist for Cloud Direct. I've got lots of experience. I've built it and broke it in every cloud. And my job is, I'm a free of charge resource, I actually work for the marketing team. And my job is to share my knowledge and experience with customers, prospects, colleagues, to help them on their cloud journey. I'm particularly prolific on LinkedIn. And so if you're interested in following me, I work a lot on the LinkedIn space and especially on the subject of AI. So let's jump into it. As we move forward, especially nowadays with the advent of technologies and the integration of AI and automation, the expectations from people are changing. People new to the workplace are the first generation that have grown up entirely with the internet being in existence. I can remember pre-internet days, showing my age there. And so the employees are expecting a certain type of experience, whilst organisations, their drivers are things like scalability, resilience. Compliance is obviously probably never been more essential than it is today, and of course optimized costs, and I'm going to touch on many of those within this presentation. So you've kind of got these shifting expectations from when employees would just do what they're given when in the beginning. Now there is a certain expectation of a certain level of experience within an organization. There are multiple compelling events while someone might look to change their virtual desktop infrastructure or indeed adopt a virtual desktop infrastructure. Security breaches is a big one. Hardware refresh is also a massive driver. I'd say those two can be represent a large portion of the compelling events. Disaster or data loss incidents. So in councils, for example, local authorities, district councils, county councils, they tend to use virtual desktop infrastructure as an obfuscation layer between things like the at-risk register for children. So it's not available to everyone, it's that extra layer. I've worked in various government organisations that use that the same to separate different protectively controlled data, and it's also very popular in law organisations for similar reasons. Another reason why AVD specifically has compelling events is the ability to grow and shrink on demand. I remember back in the day, I used to work for HMRC, and they had when electronic VAT became a thing, they needed to train 10,000 people. They basically bought a load of hardware to set up a training system that lasted about 6 months. Then after that hardware was just not fit for purpose. This obviously predates cloud. And whereas if they could have had something that was dynamically scalable, it would have been a lot more cost effective. Our tax dollars hard at work. There are shifts in working patterns. I've been possibly someone who's worked remotely for the best part of 20 years, whereas obviously pandemics notwithstanding, there is a shift in working patterns, mergers and acquisitions, end of life, cost reductions and ecosystems. So there's many different reasons why someone would look to deliver an end user compute experience delivered by VDI. So I want to touch on, for especially anybody in the audience who is a VMware customer, just to provide a little bit of context about what's going on recently with VMware. I find this a particularly interesting, compelling event because it's happened very, very quickly. So Broadcom, a chip manufacturer, acquired VMware back in November or October 31st, I think, last year. Very quickly, they announced that they were changing the way that they would commercially wrap their products. So instead of being able to buy a single product, you now had to buy a bundle of products. That obviously affected pricing. If you only wanted one thing, you end up buying 5 things that were part of a bundle. That was more expensive and you're not getting the value out of it. Moreover, they also then increased the pricing as well. So that created a number of challenges. Then they announced that they are no longer going to be maintaining VMware Horizon 7, and that's not just you can no longer buy it as of today, and when that expires in January of next year, in 11 months' time, that will no longer be receiving updates. All of this culminated with information from an earnings call with the CEO of Broadcom in December, announcing that they are going to spin off the virtual desktop side, the end user compute side of the business. So that would include things like Horizon, that would include things like VMware Workstation, those DaaS type products. And this obviously created a lot of concern with customers. Concern for customers that were VMware just generically because of the pricing implications, and the fact that there is a sort of diversification, classic acquisition model, buy it, strip it off for parts. But moreover, it was particularly concerning for those with end user compute like Horizon services. And this created a lot of market uncertainty, and that caused a lot of people to look at alternatives, especially given that there isn't a lot of options than to move away if you want to sort of maintain compliance. So within that landscape, AVD emerged as one of the strongest offerings. So just to sort of conceptualize specifically the VMware use case, that end of life is going to present a challenge when there's no longer security updates, which can lead to vulnerabilities and threats. If you are running an infrastructure that is end of life and you are subject to a breach, the subsequent fines that you may receive, such as from GDPR, will be greater than those that have exercised good judgment. And when these situations happen, when you're running a legacy system, or you're running you suffer a breach as a result of those, that can dent consumer confidence and lead to mistrust and fines that I mentioned earlier. So one of the reasons why Microsoft is and AVD is quite compelling. In August last year, from the most recent Magic Quadrant from Gartner, you can see top right hand corner, Microsoft is leading the pack in that VDI. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense really. Most people that are using VDI, the vast majority, are doing so to deliver a Microsoft operating system to their end user. Who better than Microsoft to be able to create a product going to deliver that outcome? So there is going to be a greater degree of integration between those vendor managed solutions, and that's what AVD is. It has managed components as part of it that you don't have to worry about, and I'll touch on that in a bit more detail shortly. So just tapping back into that that compelling event scenario. If you have a compelling event in your organization, what are the risks of doing nothing? It could be that those risks, in the case of VMware, that its security, it could be the risk is associated with performance. It could be that not modernizing puts you at a competitive disadvantage. and your inability to adopt newer technologies. So there are multiple risks of inaction. One of the reasons why AVD is particularly compelling, and I have to say I've had every single Citrix qualification once when I cared about that sort of thing that they had on their books. Every sales, every technology, I had all of them, and I spend my own money on AVD. It's just a better, faster, cheaper solution. So I like it because it's basically, I'm rolling back the clock a little bit. Microsoft used to be heavily invested within Citrix. In fact, for those of you old enough to remember MetaFrame and WinFrame, that was actually a joint effort, and all of that became XenApp and XenDesktop later on in life. And so Microsoft, off the back of that investment, I don't believe they're invested anymore. And indeed, I think Citrix actually trying to sell the completeness of the vision and the platform I find particularly compelling. And because it sits within inside a 365 or Azure tenancy, you have all your established boundary and rules already established within there. So it's not a different set of security products. You're benefiting from the fact that you've got your identity access management, your conditional access, all the different zero trust policies. All of that is kicked into an Azure tenancy, and you would then be able to leverage that, which means you're not having to go and duplicate on security capabilities. Also, because you can do a pay-as-you-go model, it can be incredibly cost effective, depending on your use case. So if you are looking to transition, there are a number of different sources. There's people like me for advice. There is funding available from Microsoft to help support migrations, regardless of what your particular motivation and compelling event for change is. And obviously there's lots of educational material. So if we examine the use cases for AVD, remote work obviously is a big one. Being able to provision dev and test environments. Microsoft started using, they've launched something called DevBox as we move into a future where there's more development going on. Having a desktop environment to be able to deliver against that can be quite useful, especially as development environments tend not to have 24/7 requirements. The development tends to be done and testing tends to be done in kind of in fits and starts, and as such being able to power those environments down so you're not incurring lots of cost can be advantageous. Temporary workloads like training is another example, but provisioning remote access to your partners and suppliers, that's another one. And I'm not going to read them all out, but you get the idea. There are many different use cases why a virtual desktop might be advantageous. Now, one thing I do want to point out is we just take a complete step back and just think about what are the components that 99% of organizations use. Well, most corporations and organizations use Microsoft 365. That's just, there's very few that are using G Suite. I know one or two, but by far in terms of market share, delivering that Office capability is something that every organization, or the vast majority of organizations, do. And when you are wanting to run a virtual desktop infrastructure such as Citrix and VMware, you need some hardware for that to run on. And then you need to go and pay that supplier, that vendor, a licensing cost, XenApp, XenDesktop, Horizon, whatever it may be. So you've effectively got three costs that you're having to pay out for to run that. But within AVD, because Microsoft 365 has something called a VDA, it's nice and confusing acronym, which is your rights to go and access and with things like the E365, M365 business premium, you're having that operating system rights with license mobility, so you haven't got that additional cost. XenApp and XenDesktop and Horizon, it's not cheap, just from a licensing point of view, and so you're cutting that out straight away. So immediately there's lots of there's more efficiency. You're doing more for less because you're using the capabilities within the licenses that you already own to deliver an outcome. So it's straight off the bat you have a stronger advantage with AVD, but there are many other reasons, such as its flexible pricing. Quite often VDI environments are on-prem, not exclusively, there are cloud variants, but there are on-prem investment in infrastructure. You go out one day and say, right, I want a VDI environment on VMware, Citrix, whatever, and you go out and you buy a bunch of tin. You either got it right and you ordered the right amount of tin, or you overbought or you underbought, or circumstances when the organization change, which means you have too much or not enough infrastructure, which means your investment isn't necessarily optimal. Whereas with a lot of organizations, like if I just rough maths, there's about 730 hours in a month. If most organizations are working, say, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, that equates to about 268 hours, which is roughly a third, which means if you can power down a whole bunch of your infrastructure because everyone's asleep and not using it, then you're potentially saving 2/3 on the compute cost. So it's things like that that give it another advantage, whereas you've made your capital investment in hardware, use it or don't use it, you've already spent your money. So in terms of AVD, it's got the scalability. It's an infinite amount of resource. That was really put to the test during the pandemic. It actually was the first time it actually resulted in a lead time to be able to go and get AVD. It was only a couple of days, but the demand was unprecedented. You can use multiple devices, just like most of these offerings. It's that Martini model, if those of you old enough to know what I'm talking about, anytime, any place, anywhere. But it's also a dynamic. So when you buy investments in hardware, on-prem hardware, or you buy licensing from a VDI vendor, the upgrade and the modernization of that tends to be very incremental, tends to be not very frequent, and tends to involve a larger change project. Whereas an AVD, a lot of the infrastructure is managed by Microsoft, and it's continually being updated. So you've got a level of future proofing built in there. Because it resides within Azure, you've got that regulatory compliance framework that exists within Azure, and all those security features. It natively integrates with all the security features, and it has a bunch built in already. Having used things like trying to deploy storefront or controllers for different other VDI products, deploying AVD and managing it is a relatively simple process compared to the other ones. It's not like there aren't things to consider, absolutely there are, but by comparison, the interface, very familiar, very easy, all SaaS-based, web-based. And as mentioned before, it can be incredibly cost efficient. I mean, I did some pricing for someone recently, and when I calculated it, because they had their 365 licenses already and some other elements and their working patterns, it worked out the cost was about £8 a user a month for a desktop. Now, I'm not saying yours will be that. It could be a lot more, depends on your individual circumstances. But the point is when you can pull on all those cost-saving levers, it can be profoundly different. You're talking the price of a couple of very expensive Starbucks coffees. They're all very expensive. Okay, so let's look at some of the granular elements of AVD, give you that sort of context. Great, Leon, we see where you're going with this, but what is it? So I'm hoping you can hear this and I've effectively shared sound. If you're not hearing it, Ollie or Beth, can you let me know?
No, I can't hear it.
Okay, just bear with me a moment. Right, let me play that again. Hopefully you guys can hear it. It's only a very short video, just bear with me.
Enables access to AVD from client apps or via a web browser. By default, my virtual desktop is powered down to lower costs, but the act of connecting to it powers it up. And just like that, I'm into my virtual desktop. Over the course of the next 1 hour of inactivity, various settings kick in to lifecycle my session, eventually powering down the VM to save me money.
So the reason I showed this video, so this is actually, I have this available to me on my laptop. This is a virtual desktop that I have. I actually have it GPU enabled, so I can play some games, and I'm accessing that and experiencing that through a web browser. So you can deploy clients, obviously, that's absolutely fine, but having that browser capability is great. Having that GPU capability is also great. Now, again, think about your procurement model. Do I need GPU acceleration or don't I? With the advent of AI and the need for those coming up, that's a separate conversation where the hardware landscape and the capabilities of processors will be changing over the course of the next 12-18 months. That GPU acceleration is going to become more and more important. Again, that's a significant investment. But pulling on the cost saving levers, I can go and get data center grade GPUs bolted onto this VM with a couple of clicks. It's quite easy. And I also discussed in that video there, that voiceover, that is the life cycling. So you can set it so much like you can do with the other on-prem type infrastructures. You can set policies that say, I am going to drain this particular VM until it's empty, and I'm going to set a policy that will log off inactive sessions or disconnect them and then eventually log them off. And that way, when it's completely empty, I can power that thing down to go and save time and money. Now, from an architecture point of view, one of the really cool things, and I'm actually seeing this adopted more and more, is many organizations have adopted things like a lot of SaaS products for their key products. And so they're trying to minimize the amount of infrastructure, especially more greenfield organizations. So one of the models that you can now use is you can actually have AVD without a domain controller. And you're just using the Entra ID, so it's very similar to going to office.com and getting your 365 web experience. You could have all that just using that ID. Now, one of the things that's included, which I mentioned at the top of the call about the managed services, is there's a control plane that comes with AVD. So there's front door. This is an Azure term that says I'm going to route traffic in the most efficient way possible. So let's say I have my virtual desktop, which is running in UK South in the UK, and I get on a plane and go to Australia. When I go and connect to my AVD, what it does is I'm actually, instead of going all the way across the internet back to the UK to go and consume my desktop, and sending all that the way back with all the latency inherent with using the internet over that sort of distance. What it does is it routes me via the nearest point of presence in Microsoft's network in Australia, and then I take Microsoft's private back-end network, and that traffic goes with much lower latency, so I can get an experience almost identical to that into the UK, rather than a tenfold level of latency that would come as a result of using the internet as the conduit. So front door is about data routing and optimization, web access, so you can go and get a web-based experience for that, supporting HTML5 browsers. And then brokerage and gateway services to provide security and distribute your load internally. Diagnostics and the ability to be able to query and manage all that. If you wanted to create your own web interface, you can use REST API, or actually you can use PowerShell if you choose, to be able to control and manage that, and you could actually build your own interface to go and manage these things if you were so inclined. So a user would connect, they'd log on with their Entra ID as your Active Directory account, and they would be brokered, go across that control plane that's managed by Microsoft, included within the AVD pricing that would be such as that would come with your 365 license, and they would then hit a subscription that has your VMs in it, and they would use that VM. Wonderful. but we can also either route that traffic back out the way it came, so internet traffic egresses out by your corporate systems, or you can go straight out of the Microsoft network, depending on the use case. That's obviously going to be incredibly fast, and putting protection in that is child's play, but that may be something you don't want to do, but the option is there. Now, you may want to evolve that. Probably for a lot of you, you actually live in possibly not a greenfield type company, but you have grown up with Azure Active Directory, so you can deliver that, and all the policies and group policies and what have you, can deliver that integration that you already have with your 365. You've probably got your Azure AD Connect, the fact that your directories are synchronized. You've probably already got that today. This can go and utilize that. And then if you want to layer on additional services, you could provide VPN access, for example. So people come in over a site-to-site VPN or a person-to-site VPN if you so chose. You can deliver outbound protection using Azure Firewall. You can offer disaster recovery and backup services to go and protect or be able to distribute your AVD to multiple locations. Again, something that is a lot more cost optimal than, say, I've got 2 data centers, I bought a load of kit, that's my primary site, I've got a load of kit in my secondary site. 99.9% of the time, touch wood, there are no disasters taking place. So that, as much as that's an insurance policy, it's a very expensive insurance policy. You wouldn't want your insurance policy for your car to be the same price as your car. And then you can take it further where you're managing your images. So image lifecycle management, if you've got applications that you are updating at a frequency, you can use something called Azure Image Builder to manage those and integrate any updates that you want to do. You can post that to the gallery, and then you can life cycle those images. So as you've got 500 users across X number of servers, then you set one server to go and drain, and once it's drained, it gets life cycled out and replaced with version 2 of your image that contains all your updates. Rinse and repeat, and now you have a seamless rollout of your new image as you rinse and repeat that process. And you can build in automation. This is what I use. I use any security keys I can go and store in the Key Vault. I use the Azure automation to schedule and say, is anyone logged on? If not, go and after X period of time, go and shut that machine down. And that way, my AVD, when I use it, is actually costing me about £2 a month. Actually, it probably costs me more in storage than it does in compute because I don't use it all the time. But it's great to have it when I need it. So if you're thinking about adopting Azure Virtual Desktop, there are things that you want to consider. Obviously, you want to consider what you're doing. You do an assessment of your existing needs or infrastructure. And then obviously you want to go and deploy that. But there are many steps in between that you should consider. So you'll want to consider your connectivity. Are you happy with people coming in over a web browser type session? Do you want it to be over an express route or a point-to-point VPN or site-to-site VPN? What are your connectivity requirements? Because that's going to require some configuration in the cloud. What are your licensing considerations? What is the right sizing? This is a big one. Buy for what you need, not what you have. I cannot stress that enough. When you do that, you're generally speaking, more often than not, unless your desktop's 100 years old, that's likely going to save you money. Have you put together a business case to make sure you understand what is this going to cost me? And what are the benefits of it, and how does that stack up against another capital investment of hardware? I'm not going to read these all out, but there are many things to go and consider on that journey. Another thing that you might want to consider is funding. Microsoft have funding available to actually facilitate and cover off a lot of the elements that are on the screen. Actually, all of the elements on the screen, thinking about it. So One of the things that we offer is we will offer a structured workshop. Now this is a free of charge workshop where we can help you build out that business case, understand your requirements, and see whether there are any funding pathways available to you. Looking at your estate and what is required, we can have that technical conversation about the estate and what that target operating model will look like, and then we can put together a plan that will describe what it is and what the steps on that journey that need to be taken, and possibly and hopefully, depending on your use case, hopefully being funded by Microsoft to minimize the cost to you. This workshop is free. It includes that assessment, that technical validation, and a plan to be able to get you to AVD, and that element there is no cost to. So I should have mentioned this at the top of the call. With all my webinars, I do offer some Q&A. So I will leave it a moment for you guys to go, and if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat. Beth will let me know if there are any questions, and I'll just give it 30 seconds so you have some chance to go and write out your questions. And if there aren't any, I will close the call down. Beth, are you seeing anything coming through?
No, no questions.
Okay, right. Well, I will leave it there. Once again, my name is Leon Godwin. Please follow me on LinkedIn, especially if you're interested in seeing what's going on in the business world around AI. If you have any specific questions, you can, or you want to be able to explore the options around AVD more, there are contact details on the screen. Go and screen grab now, and obviously you can reach out to me directly if you have any specific queries. Thanks very much for your time. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.